As one of the fathers of the modern phone industry, Nokia is revered by many to this day for the level of build quality of its devices, and yet that didn't help the company when it was caught off guard by the stratospheric surge in demand for smartphones. Many thought that the Finnish company made all the wrong decisions, especially when it decided to go for an infant of an operating system in Windows Phone. The thought of what Nokia could have been like if it instead hedged its bet and adopted Android as well is still stuck at the back of the head of many people. We won't be having a miraculous remake of history today, but we all finally have the opportunity to see what Nokia hardware powered by Android feels like. With its X line, Nokia surprised many by finally seeing fit to experiment with Android, though this is still a fork of the platform. The entry-level Nokia X we'll be looking at today then comes with all the signature Nokia services like its App Store and here Maps, but none from Google. So there's no Play Store, no Google Maps and many more. Is that necessarily a bad thing? This is Chris with Phone Arena, let's find out. Whether because it's a near-flawless look-alike to the latest Asha 503 or because the Asha in turn draws inspiration from Nokia's Lumia 525, we felt like we knew the Nokia X from the get-go. The X inherited the singular capacitive back button from the Asha line and the rectangular frame with its moderately sharp edges. The removable rear shell is made of solid matte plastic, same as the buttons on the right side of the X. Both the volume rocker and the power key provide profound feedback and there is a nice amount of travel to them. Handling the Nokia X is easy. The small device is perfect for one-handed use, but we couldn't shake off the feeling that we're using a toy phone. And it's not just because of the bright palette of color options, it's also the profoundly plastic but very solid exterior that made us feel like we're operating a reinforced child-proof piece of hardware. On the bright side, while there is no arguing this looks and feels like an entry-level device, the overall build quality is quite impressive. When looking at the 4-inch 480 by 800 pixel resolution display on the Nokia X, the results kind of speak for themselves. To start off, this isn't the sharpest panel out there, though at 233 pixels per inch we didn't actually find much reason for complaint. But it's in color reproduction that the panel totally disappoints. It's got a very cold color temperature of 9300 Kelvins, resulting in a noticeably bluish fringe throughout. This problem is especially noticeable when the display has to render different shades of grey. Worse yet, the display isn't very bright, managing just 359 nits at its very best. This, combined with the highly reflective glass on top of the display, amounts to a frustrating outdoors viewing experience. The Nokia X runs on a fork of Android that it chose to call the Nokia X software platform. Regardless, this is very much Android at its core, though it does look drastically different when talking about the lock screen and the two available home screen. The home screen, for example, is style-centric and those can be all resized just like on Windows Phone 8. Unlike with Microsoft styles, however, the Nokia X's are completely static. There is also no drawer menu with all of your apps. Instead, those go directly on your home screen, though you can organize them into folders. Swiping from the top of your UI will introduce you to a small status bar which holds 4 quick toggles for easy access to stuff such as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Notifications are fed to your lock screen and can all be accessed through the Fastlane screen. Fastlane is a new dedicated home screen inherited from the Asha line. Accessible by swiping left or right from the default home screen, Fastlane is a separate screen that keeps track of recent apps and also fills with notification-like updates triggered by different events. For example, receiving an SMS text message will register on Fastlane, and so will the latest photo you took with the X's camera. Speaking of settings, these are among the few indications that the Nokia X is indeed running on a highly customized Android, but Android nevertheless. Essentially identical to what you'll find in the stock version of Google software, the menu itself offers no surprises and little extras. For example, you can activate double tap to wake functionality, but waking up your Nokia X with a simple double tap simply does not work. Instead, you have to use moderate force in order to unlock the screen that way. But how do essential apps like messaging, contacts and email function and look on Nokia's new software? In a nutshell, they're as basic and straightforward as these go, but there are some very noteworthy exceptions. For example, something as simple as your calendar simply won't allow you to add events unless you connect it to a Microsoft Exchange account. And what about third-party apps? Unfortunately, the choice is quite limited, as you're only getting access to Nokia's App Store, which feels absolutely empty when compared to Google's Play Store. Still, you do have access to major apps such as Facebook, Twitter, Vine, Snapchat and Skype, but not too much beyond that. Thankfully, Nokia's App Store seems to be interconnected with third-party app stores like SlideMe and Aptoid, and knows if the app you're looking for is available there. One of the perks of the Nokia X is the availability of 2 SIM slots. Popular among people in developing countries, the specific configuration that you get is dual standby, meaning that you can only use one SIM card at any one time. So, for example, if you're holding a call on SIM 1, SIM 2 will be unreachable. Moreover, only one of the two slots allows for 3G connectivity, while the other one is limited to 2G GSM connectivity. As for the software surrounding the functionality, it's fairly basic but well done. Placing any call will trigger a prompt asking you to choose through which SIM card to place a call, though you can also automate the process by attaching tags to certain contacts. That way you can, for example, set the Nokia X to call your immediate family only through your first SIM and have all work-related contacts default to the second one. From the moment we picked up the Nokia X, we knew we're faced with a device that is going to struggle pushing Android. That's not surprising, as the X is powered by 1 GHz dual-core Snapdragon S4 processor and a measly 512 MB of RAM. And while we've seen devices handle themselves just fine with this particular Qualcomm chip, 512 MB of RAM have proven insufficient to run Android without a hitch. This is especially true when you're dealing with the Nokia X's software. All said, expect to be able to run some medium-intensive apps and game titles without too much trouble. Graphics-intensive games like Asphalt 8, however, will run at low frame rate and others will prove completely unplayable. Looking at browsing on the Nokia X, it's a mixed bag. That's because while load speeds are acceptable for this class, navigating around web pages is frustrating due to laggy scrolling and panning. In other words, don't expect to enjoy your browsing experience on the Nokia X. In terms of connectivity options, the list is pretty basic. There's Wi-Fi and assisted GPS of course, and Bluetooth 3.0 is also on board. A little disappointing, however, is the rather limited speed of the 3G radio on board, which maxes out at 7.2 megabits. The Nokia X comes with a wildly unimpressive 3 megapixel camera with fixed focus and no flash to speak of. It has a tiny sensor and narrow f2.8 aperture, further complicating things when light isn't abundant. You'll find no front-facing cam with this phone. As for the UI itself, it's absolutely basic. There are shortcuts for white balance and ISO tweaking, and you also get 3 shooting modes: stills, video and panoramas. Thankfully, the Nokia X doesn't take forever to commit a new snap to its memory, so no complaints there. So what kind of snaps can you expect to produce if you opt for the Nokia X? Well, images often come out underexposed and colors are a bit lifeless. If that wasn't enough, there's also a pretty noticeable purple fringing with many shots. On the whole, images are on the soft side and the X's camera resolves a pretty limited amount of fine detail. Moreover, snaps are riddled with digital noise even when light is abundant. Lastly, the lack of auto or manual focus will be a needle in the eye for some. As for low light scenarios, those usually prove too challenging for the tiny snapper, a situation that is only magnified by the lack of an LED flash. And lastly, and as far as video capture goes, this is an equally unsatisfying aspect of the 3 megapixel snapper. The videos the camera produces are low resolution and are lacking in every imaginable aspect, whether it's proper exposure, acceptable frame rate or even decent sound reproduction. Despite looking slightly different, the multimedia app bundle that comes pre-packed with the Nokia X is very close to their stock Android counterparts, and that can be both a good and a bad thing, depending on your preferences. So while the apps themselves like the gallery, music and video players are intuitive, they're also very limited with their functionality. So if you're looking for something more functional, you may have to go to the App Store and find something different. Call quality is one of the few departments where the Nokia X's performance didn't offer an unpleasant surprise. Don't get us wrong, there's nothing impressive here, but instead we got what we would expect from a device in this price class. Both the microphone and the in-ear speaker offer medium volumes, though both also distort voices in a similar way. Both sides reported voices that were flatter than in reality, though tonal information is not entirely lost. In other words, you know the person you're talking to by their voice, but you may have to go for a mental squint every now and then. Nestled within the Nokia X's body is a usually placeable 1500 mAh battery, which Nokia rates good for up to 17 days of standby time when utilizing both SIM cards. Talk time on a 3G network clocks at about 13 hours and video playback can go on for nearly 8 hours and 30 minutes. Lastly, browsing time is rated at 4 hours and 42 minutes. Of course, these numbers are kind of cryptic, which is why we put the Nokia X through our in-house battery test, which aims to replicate your everyday smartphone usage routine. Unfortunately for the X, its result of 4 hours and 53 minutes is kind of disappointing, all things considered. Due to its pricing, the Nokia X can be both an acceptable purchase or a completely unfounded one, depending on where it is you call home. In the States, for example, Nokia sells the X through Amazon for anywhere between $145 to $170. At this price, pitching in an extra $10 for the far more capable Motorola Moto G is a no-brainer. You get a bigger and better screen, vastly superior performance in terms of speed and imaging, and a true Android experience. In some European countries like France, however, the difference is not that small. The Nokia X retails for €119 there, while the Moto G costs $159. In those countries, an adequate full-fledged Android alternative is Sony's new Xperia E1, which costs about $139. Lastly, LG's new 3.5-inch L40, which comes packing the latest KitKat 4.4 update and very similar hardware, costs about €88. In conclusion, we're kind of unable to recommend the Nokia X. Whether it's the toyish design, the poor display and camera and overall performance, or just the extremely limited nature of the forked Android on board, it's safe to say that we expected more. Thank you for tuning in for this Nokia X review. This was Chris with Phone Arena. See you next time.